Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Rubin Uriarte will be with us this evening. Rubin has been a member of MUFON, that's the Mutual UFO Network, for over 20 years, and is currently the state director for Northern California. He was formerly a state coordinator for Crop Circle Phenomena Research International and research director for Beyond Boundaries, a UFO tour company. He also served on OPUS, Organization for Paranormal and Support Understanding, as a board member. Rubin is now the liaison between MUFON and its counterpart in Mexico, OMIFO. He has written or co-authored several books, including Mexico's Roswell, The Other Roswell, the UFO Crash on the Texas-Mexican Border, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter, and the Koyami Incident. Did I miss any books?
Oh, there was another book recently that both Noe Torres and I had worked in collaboration with our good friends from Mexico, two outstanding investigators. And we wrote a book called UFOs Over Mexico, Encounters with Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Aerial object phenomena. And it was all about pilot sightings and primarily encounters with UFOs in Mexico and South America, which just kind of gives us a picture of what's going on throughout the world.
That's also available at Roswell Books as well as Amazon?
Yes, and there's a couple of other books that also my good friend Noe and several other colleagues have collaborated on. That's also, if one goes on to roswellbooks.com, they'll see the large book lists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had Rubin on back in April of this year, and I managed to get him back on soon, but there may be a few folks out there that didn't listen last time, so hopefully we won't be too repetitive.
Yes, we covered a lot of material, and one of the topics that I know that we wanted to get into was it's a topic that I've had a fascination for, is the whole area of the whole phenomenon regarding Bigfoot and other types of creatures, cryptozoology, because that also plays into this whole connection with it may play a connection with UFO sightings.
So many UFO people seem to scoff at Bigfoot, and ghost hunters sometimes aren't interested in UFOs, and I find it bizarre when someone into any kind of a paranormal activity would look down on other but equal interests. And here you are interested in both.
Oh, yes. I could later on also share with you some interesting ghost encounters.
Fantastic.
That also may be related to ET. A really interesting experience that I had. But yes, I just think we just need to keep an open mind. Certainly, MUFON, we're focused on UFO sightings, and we have a large database. But as I mentioned, that this is a crossover because the phenomena, it covers so many different aspects. We're talking about crop circles, to cattle mutilations, to abductions, to paranormal activities. It cuts across the whole gamut. And I particularly have been interested in Bigfoot, not only because it just fascinates me, but it's because I've met so many people who've had their own encounters. And I live here in Northern California, and I'm only several hours away from the major large forests where the where the Bigfoot has been seen. So it's just like UFOs. People have had their encounters and their sightings, and it just happens to be where it's also in the same vicinity where Bigfoot has been sighted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard reports from some people where they'll say they saw some unidentified object in the sky, and then shortly thereafter there was a Bigfoot sighting. And
yes,
there could possibly be a connection, but there also could be that there is a being from another planet that looks like Bigfoot, and it's being mistaken one for the other.
It could be, yes. What I'll be presenting are cases of Bigfoot sightings that are associated with UFOs. Mm-hmm. And I don't claim to be a Bigfoot expert, of course, but I do have friends that are researchers that do take this very seriously. And at the same time, we do share notes. And so I'm always open to what the Bigfoot community has. And again, the same, it follows the same parallel as UFO investigations. Mm-hmm. People see a strange sighting, it affects them. Sometimes they'll hold on to the memory and then they'll share it. And the fact that evidence is always still part of the goal is to obtain some mm-hmm. sort of evidence. Obviously, finding a body of a Bigfoot would definitely bring us an answer, possibly. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, those are my neighbor's dogs barking in the background. Sorry about that.
I have a dog too.
But at the same time, you have trace evidence where you have footprints, handprints, sometimes hair samples. And it's the same thing like with what we do as investigators. Well, if there's a landing of a strange craft, we hope to find evidence of that. If the craft has already left, but we look for any sort of trace landings or any sort of impact to the environment, to mm-hmm. On the ground or on the vegetation. So there's a whole series of clues that we would be looking at, Chris, in order to determine if something has happened. And we go basically on the testimony of the witnesses.
Do you have any notable Bigfoot researchers that you're acquainted with?
Well, there's several. I had a chance to attend the Mile High conference last year, where it was actually a UFO and Bigfoot mm-hmm. conference. And, of course, I met Mr. David Paulides, who has been dealing with the missing people yes. phenomena.
He started out looking for Bigfoot, and then he got caught up in the missing person thing, and I guess the missing people has just stolen his attention away.
Yeah, well, actually, he was also a MUFON investigator here in Northern California. Yeah, he was with our chapter way back, and he's also has a law enforcement experience, and a number of our investigators come from the law enforcement mm-hmm. community. And there are a number of other really interesting researchers that I met at the conference. Some of them who've had that are artists. A good friend of mine, Sibylla, she is an artist and does a lot of artist renditions of, mm-hmm. of Bigfoot, and a couple of other people that their names escape me at the moment.
Yes. But I know the feeling.
But yeah, but I think the most fascinating, Chris, since we're talking about the conference, I was fascinated with this one particular video footage where they used infrared camera, mm-hmm. and they were able to record these Bigfoot creatures. You could see the top of their heads as they were hiding behind a mound, but you could see their heads moving. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, you could see a creature or humanoid, almost walking like a man, but it had a Bigfoot creature, almost a gorilla shape, very well built, but this thing was just walking almost as a human being, that had that stroll to it. I was really taken away by that. So I know there's good research out there, and as well as there is in the whole UFO spectrum, and with the photographs and the testimony, and so some of the things I'll be presenting tonight are historical cases.
Well, go ahead and start with one of the cases you'd like to present.
Yeah, this one is one of my favorites. We had it in the Cowboys and Aliens book, but also we had borrowed the material from Brad Steiger, and he has written a number of books regarding the paranormal. And what's interesting about this is that Bigfoot, some people believe, as he had mentioned, that it's not a native of this planet, but it may have been dropped off upon Earth by ETs. And the idea that Bigfoot and UFOs are connected is actually not something new. The first story suggesting Bigfoot was a hairy cast-off from outer space that appeared in the late 1800s. And what happened, and also the other thing is to consider, Chris, is that the people in the Old West, especially the Native Americans, they reported seeing large man-like beasts. Almost all Native Americans had legends of hairy giants resembling Bigfoot. Some tales were stranger than others, and some even suggested that Bigfoot was a meat-eating cannibal. And what I find interesting is that this creature is seen in different parts of the world, on different parts of the continent. It's seen in forests, along the border as well, Chris, between the Mexico and U.S. border. And what I found interesting was that the Tarahumara Indians, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they have a legend that or information. There was a mask that was found back in the 1960s. It was a mask that was made by the Tarahumaras, and they're a large Indian population in the northern Chihuahua Mountains, and that's where they live. Yeah, if you're probably familiar with Copper Canyon and that area, that's where they. What they had in terms of their legend is that they used to say that these giants would come and steal the women, and then would also grab and eat the children. So that's where you might have that connection that it was a Bigfoot was a cannibal, but also the Bigfoot was seen as a spiritual being. So with psychic abilities, it was a supernatural. And sometimes it would come and go. It would vanish in thin air. Also, that leads to a whole other direction as well. They also there were a number of depictions you find among Native American culture in petroglyphs and totem poles. So anyway, as it relates to this story, going back to the 1800s. There was a journal that was written by Mr. Wyatt, and he was a cattleman, and he lived in Northern California back in the late 1800s. And this story first appeared in Brad Steiger's book, Real Monsters, Gruesome Critters, and Beasts from the Dark Side. And the way it starts is that a gentleman by the name of J.C. Wyatt, and he was from Memphis, Tennessee, had sent a copy of his grandfather's journal, and it contained some fascinating information about these in the entry of the journal, and it was dated again in 1888. Wyatt's grandfather lived in Humboldt County, and that's up here in Northern California. And they were delivering cattle to the local cowhands, or the cowhands were working with him, and they were delivering this cattle to among the settlements there. It was known as Big Woods country, and they also would live with the local Indian tribes and this is where Wyatt became very fluent in many of the tribal languages, and he was very proficient in sign language, and he partook in many of the tribal activities. So he, at that time, there were the Native American population was very large, and slowly they became a minority as California, there was a huge gold rush at that time, and people from all over the world were coming and settling in. Mm-hmm. So the Native Americans became a minority. So one day, James Wyatt came upon a man from a tribe, and he was carrying a large platter of raw meat. And at first, the man seemed afraid to answer any of Wyatt's questions concerning why was he carrying this platter of meat. Finally, he gave in to the questions that were from Wyatt, and so they start walking into toward a cave. It was in a cliff, and in there, when Wyatt looked inside the cave, he saw this beast with long, shiny black hair that covered its entire body, except for its palms and an area around its eyes. The man-like creature did not seem wild or vicious. He just sat cross-legged, Indian style, and the creature just started to eat, wolf down the raw meat. And Wyatt described the creature as built like a well-developed man, except it lacked the neck and it had long body hair, and the creature's head seemed to rest directly on its shoulders. So, despite its frightening appearance, the creature didn't seem aggressive or dangerous, and as Wyatt and the other Native Americans approached, the creature sat contentedly eating his meat. And Wyatt said that he went back to visit the creature on more than a dozen occasions. But unfortunately, that account from Wyatt wasn't listed in the journal. But he just said that he went back to visit the creature, and even if possibly he may have tried to communicate with the Bigfoot, although there's no really description in there. But finally, Wyatt wanted to get more information about the creature from the Native Americans. And so what he did, he traded 2 pounds of tobacco, an axe, and a compass to one of the tribesmen. And so in order so that the tribesmen could share with Wyatt the origin of the hairy visitor. And one of the men from the tribe took Wyatt to a high peak of one of the nearby rocks on a clear night, and he started to tell them this amazing story. And he said that the locals, the Native Americans there, referred to these creatures as crazy bears. And that the crazy bear were brought to the big woods from the stars. And as you are aware, Chris, the Native Americans, they called extraterrestrials star people.
Yes.
So in here they referred, they told, or the gentleman told Wyatt that a small moon had flown down like a swooping eagle and had landed on a plateau a few miles away from the tribe's encampment. The beast in the cave and 2 other crazy bears had been flung out of the moon before the craft had once again soared off to the stars. So that's a clue right there for us. Mm-hmm. And again, this is just the story of the observations from the witness. And the man told Wyatt that there were other crazy bears that had been left in the vicinity over the years. And Wyatt's guide and several of his fellow villagers, they occasionally seen the men who put the crazy bears off the small moons. And they describe him as they weren't like the giant hairy ones, but they appear to be more like men. The men from the small moons had much shorter hair than the tribes people, though they wore shiny clothing, and they always waved to the Indians in a friendly manner before they closed the door in the small moon and flew back to the stars. So what I find fascinating is that the description of the small moon appears to be that of a sphere. These sphere-like objects, and that's what Chris. Out of all the sightings that we get reported, at least here within our MUFON database, we have 23 classifications of shapes. Like triangles, flying saucers, cylinders, whatever. The largest amount of sightings that we get are from sphere-like objects.
Wow!
These balls of metallic or plasma. So that, and what I find also interesting, Chris, is that back then we didn't have any airplanes or we didn't have things flying up in the sky, and so people who try to describe what they were seeing try to use something that they could associate with. So I thought it was quite clever how they describe these ships as small moons.
Wasn't the craft that Travis Walton had his encounter with described as being a sphere also?
I believe back it was like a saucer shape for that particular case.
Oh.
It was spinning, yes.
Okay.
But then again, there's been a number of so many other cases where these sphere-like objects would appear in different colors and that are seen nowadays by pilots and witnesses, police officers, you name it. We get so many different reports, and they should change shape as well. But I guess going back to the incident where the crazy bears, the question that Wyatt or James Wyatt, the godson of grandson of his had indicated that maybe these they weren't exiled. Maybe they were exiled to our planet. Maybe for whatever reason they were brought here, and we could run so many different theories as to why they're here, and I'm sure we'll probably get a variety of different answers from other researchers onto if they believe that perhaps the Bigfoot creature is a product from outer space, or the origin came from outer space.
Picked them up on another planet and discovered they ate too much, and so they're like, get that thing off the ship.
Yeah. They were brought here, or possibly that maybe the visitors who rode in the small moons, they picked up these ape-shaped figure object. These beings, and experimented on them and returned them to Earth in a genetically altered condition.
That's also possible.
Could be. I mean, I always hear, Chris, perhaps the Bigfoot is a prehistoric ape, a descendant of the creature called Gigantopithecus.
Yes.
And then the other theory I hear is that maybe there's a connection to the Neanderthal. It could be a Neanderthal human hybrid. And then the other is, of course, the whole ET connection that they come from outer space, in which this story here that I just shared with you points out. Yes, that these visitors, they were brought by visitors from space.
Do you have any indication from the story how long ago it was reported, or did that not come up in the notes?
Well, the journal, it indicated in 1888.
That was when he wrote it down, but did he say when the person telling him the story said it took place?
Okay, the specific, I don't have that information. No.
Considering Bigfoot has been cited for thousands of years, it would make for a good story if the story the man was telling could be documented, or not documented, but chronographed way back in time.
Yeah, the only thing I have indicated is that he had wrote it down on 1880, but specifically as far as what date and how, could have happened a lot earlier.
Ago. Okay.
Yeah, but it was a journal that his grandfather kept. Mm-hmm. So that's what's interesting. Also, this whole thing about these sightings and UFO connections. I was in Puerto Rico, Chris, back in 1994, and this was when I was with a group called Beyond Boundaries. You had mentioned it earlier. It was in fact, the business was run by two very good friends of mine, Pike and Joyce Murphy. And they lived in near Granbury, Texas, and that's where they had their travel business. And they would conduct UFO expeditions to hotspots, and I was really fortunate to have been a part of it. We did a number of crop circle expeditions, and also we traveled to other countries as well. And one of them was in Puerto Rico, and when back in 1994, I was talking to this gentleman on the phone, and he told me that he said that he had a Bigfoot sighting. And I said, how did that occur? And he said that he was up in the rainforest called El Yunque. And it's a national forest there, and beautiful place to visit for tourists to visit. And that he was looking through his binoculars, and he saw this creature built very similar to Bigfoot, and that the creature was staring directly at him. He said when he looked at the binoculars and saw that the creature was staring back at him, he said that he froze in terror.
I can imagine.
And I thought, that's, kind of interesting. I mean, you always associate Bigfoot with large forest areas here, like here in the Pacific Northwest and up there in the Midwest and Montana, Wyoming, and toward the east. And then I started to realize, no, this is a creature it's seen in so many parts of the world. And then I also found out that Bigfoot is also very prevalent in Cuba.
I had no idea.
I thought, well, that, how this creature got there is interesting. But the fact that there's one thing about Puerto Rico, and I'm finding out about Cuba, is that there's a whole vast cave system, which that's where they probably live and they survive off the environment there. And it also it's very similar to a connection with a friend of mine who researched UFOs and also had investigated a Bigfoot encounter also in Chihuahua, Mexico. And he had mentioned that to me, and in fact he wrote to me that there were a number of witnesses. There was a family of 5, and they lived in a nearby ranch that was located next to some abandoned copper mines, and that the witnesses all of a sudden saw this small Bigfoot. They call him el hombre peludo. El hombre peludo means the hairy man. They saw it, but that this creature was about 6 feet. It wasn't the big 8 or larger size Bigfoot like we get reported here in the Pacific Northwest. But unlike that, it was about the normal size, around 6 feet, and that they saw it screaming, and so the family got into the car and took off, and then came back, and eventually they talked to my friend Gilberto, and they went out to those copper mines, but didn't find anything. But I also find interesting is that I had another friend of mine who was camping up there in Arizona in the arid area, and he saw a Bigfoot-like creature, but he described it as very thin. So, yeah, I wonder, Chris, maybe they vary in size depending on the environment, the geography. If the place is sparse and arid, maybe they're not going to grow as big as they would if they lived here in the Northwest. I'm using that for example. Here you have a lot of vegetation, you have a lot of game, deers and other types of animals, birds, water, freshwater lakes, and all that makes it an ideal habitat.
The skunk ape out of Florida, which is seen in the Everglades, which is pretty thick brush, but it's not real tall. And the skunk ape has been averaging about 6 feet tall.
Oh, okay.
So
that's interesting.
There is some connection between the location of the sighting and the size of the creatures.
Yes, so that's interesting. That we're among the Bigfoot researchers when they get the possibility of measuring their foot or handprints, if they're lucky, and you might get various sizes. Then again, it could be there might be a juvenile. It depends on the size.
One of the more recent sightings in Fouke, Arkansas, the woman that saw it, I believe, said it was about 5 feet tall. And she'd seen it step out into the road right after she drove by because she had to stop to turn around. And it looked at her and she looked at it. And she said it looked surprised. And then it ran off into the brush. And her comment was she always thought Bigfoot was bigger. And Lyle Blackburn, who was talking to her, said it had to have been a juvenile. We don't all come along at the same size.
Wow.
He's the go-to guy for anybody in Fouke with a sighting now.
Wow, that's great. You probably have heard, of course, some of these sightings where people have claimed to see a Bigfoot creature, and then all of a sudden it vanishes into air, as if it stepped into another dimension. And maybe that might be why we don't have any evidence or any of these creatures that are captured if they have that ability. And I know there's a number of some researchers have believed that they come from another dimension and that they have these psychic abilities.
Yes.
Have you come across that with from some of the other information from other researchers, Chris?
Yes, I have. Curious. I've heard several different researchers who said that they believed that Bigfoot was trans-dimensional. It would move from one dimension to another, and it was at its own thought process, whether or not you saw it or not. Like if the creature wanted you to see it, you'd see it. And if the creature didn't want you to see it, you wouldn't see it. That kind of thing. I've heard that from a few different researchers. We've also had a few sightings here in the Laredo area. Several were out at Lake Alice, which is just north of the city of Alice. And another one was from Joe, a friend of mine, who saw it while driving back from Freer. And what he described was a Bigfoot standing on the side of the highway. And there aren't a whole lot of trees in this area. We got a few mesquite, and that's about it. And yet he swears that he saw this creature standing on the side of the highway.
I look at different websites and databases on Bigfoot sightings, and you folks from Texas do get quite your share of sightings.
Yeah,
your state's so big, and it's also so diverse.
Most of the sightings are along the eastern area, where the Piney Woods and the Sabine River and in that area. And most researchers will say that Bigfoot doesn't hang out in our neck of the woods, and yet I have had several people tell me they've seen him.
I have some other historical cases I can share with you, Chris, and the audience.
I'd love to hear them.
My good friend Noe had helped put together this presentation.
He's into Bigfoot, too.
Yes. In fact, we did a Skype presentation to Dallas MUFON, and so most of the information that I'm sharing with you is based from the presentation that we gave to Dallas MUFON. And I think that, again, it's good. Before you wouldn't have this. Most of the organizations back then, even the Bigfoot community, they were all to themselves. In other words, they were closed off. And now I would say with the interest and the fact that there's this crossover of the phenomena that we need to keep an open mind.
Yes.
And what I found fascinating with this one case, and this happened in 1991 in Chile near the Andes Mountains, where a Bigfoot-like creature was next to a flying saucer on an isolated mountain. And the witnesses, they first mistook it for a gorilla, except that it had a human-shaped, almost a human-shaped body and face. And the incident was witnessed by two men. It was a Chilean architect and a Chilean judge. I mean, he had two credible witnesses. And this story was published on a tabloid newspaper on June 2nd, 1981. Architect Oscar Zamora and his friend, a judge, they swear that their encounters did happen. It was true. The two men were hiking in a remote area near the Andes Mountains, and he stumbled upon a big UFO it was shaped like a cigar, and the craft was approximately 240 feet away from them. At first, the witnesses, they thought it was a military plane, and when looking for an insignia, they saw this 6-foot tall, hairy, human-looking being that could have been mistaken for a gorilla, except for his face. And luckily, for the two gentlemen, they apparently this creature did not see the two men, and so the two men, they hid quietly behind some rocks and watched closely and observed this being and the craft for approximately 15 minutes.
Dang.
So suddenly there was a metal ladder that descended from the UFO, and the being started to walk toward the UFO. And moments later, the UFO raised up like a helicopter, and it quietly, then in a few seconds, disappeared at a great speed, and it left the vegetation where the ship was at. It burnt the vegetation that way. So that was a clue. And they remained silent, Chris, about the incident in fear of being ridiculed and losing their jobs. But they finally shared this information to the public.
Just a quick note. You said it was mentioned in a tabloid magazine, and a lot of people will say, it's just one of those stories. But they're the only kind of magazines that will sometimes run these stories. Because mainstream journalists are like, I'm not going to run that. But it's a good story, and somebody has to print it.
I believe it probably was originally printed in Spanish, and then it was picked up by one of the English speaking tabloids or newspapers way back at that time.
A lot of people don't know it, but the National Enquirer was started by a CIA operative. He would insist.
Oh, really?
Yes, he would insist anytime there was a UFO story that it went on the front page, even though UFO stories weren't that big of a seller at the time.
Oh, wow. I have a couple of other cases to share with you. This came primarily out of a book called Is Bigfoot Possibly an Alien Entity? And it was written by Dr. Franklin Ruhl. Ruehl, PhD. He's
the one that shows up on Ancient Aliens now and then, isn't he?
I believe so, yes.
A really old, wrinkled guy. He used to be on Sightings, the Henry Winkler show.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he wrote a couple of interesting accounts here I'd like to share with you.
Yes, sir. Go for it.
And historically, but this happened back in October 21st in 1973. This was a while back. There was a woman by the name of Mrs. Rialpha Hetfield, and both she and her 13-year-old son, they were sleeping in a trailer in Cincinnati, Ohio, on the morning of October 21st. And she got up in order to get some water, a drink of water, and it was approximately 2:30 a.m., and then she noticed that there was a strange light in the adjoining parking lot, and she looked out her window, and her attention was drawn in particular to an inexplicable cone of light. It was shaped like a huge bubble umbrella, about seven feet in diameter. So it was like a spotlight, hitting the ground.
Yes.
And nearby, she spotted a grayish ape-like creature with a large downward angled snout, no neck, and a sizable waist. And it was moving slowly, and then it entered into the light. About 5 minutes later, both the ape man and the UFO disappeared quickly. Yeah, and then right around the same time, this is October 25th, again in the same year, in 1973, there were a group of farmers in Fayette County, and that's in Pennsylvania. And the farmers caught sight of a dome-shaped UFO that was brightly lit and about 100 feet in diameter. That was a big ship. Mm-hmm. As the locals drove toward it, they saw a pair of gargantuan creatures covered with thick matted hair, luminescent green eyes, and long arms that dangled below their knees. I think I would be scared if I saw that, Chris.
Yes.
A farmer's son fired a gunshot at the creatures, one of which raised its right hand in the air. At that very moment, the UFO disappeared. Then the two Bigfoots escaped. The UFO disappeared, mm-hmm. But then the two Bigfoots, they escaped into the woods and were never seen again. Yeah, God, I have a friend of mine. I'll share a real quick story. He was interested. He's a Bigfoot researcher, but also into crop circles. And mm-hmm. I had some pretty interesting samples of crops of wheat that was exposed inside a crop circle, and they were blown at the nodes there. And mm-hmm. So we made a trade, Chris. I gave him the samples, and he gave me some plaster of Paris footprints of some crop circles. Mm-hmm. Of Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me an interesting story that he said that one time he was investigating a case. It was out there in Ohio, and he talked to a farmer, and the farmer said he was out on his tractor, and the farmer was driving his tractor out toward one of the fields, and he saw this, and the farmer saw a silhouette of a person that was kneeling or sitting down. So as he approached the silhouette, the being stood up and just started to walk, and he saw that it was hairy, and it walked into the woods, into a row of trees, and it disappeared. So my friend told me that he got the explanation, and that he had talked to a friend of his, and that is this woman who had these psychic abilities, and she said that what that gentleman saw was a female. And my friend thought, what? That's interesting. So anyway, he goes back, talks to the farmer, and he said, "Hey, a friend of his suggested that perhaps the being was a female." And the farmer looked at my friend in puzzlement, and then he told my friend, he said, "Walk with me," and they walked toward the row of trees, and they found these footprints, but they were bigger, they were huge, they were a lot larger than the other footprints. So the speculation is perhaps the lady was right, that what originally the first being was a female, mm-hmm. and that later there was a larger male right there, and then they found these interesting footprints. And it's those kind of stories that so intriguing.
Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of folks out there that do believe that there's a connection between Bigfoot and UFOs. Yes.
I wanted to also share this story. There was same with the cases that occurred in the 70s. There was one that happened December 9th, 1974, there was a dairy farmer. His name was William Bosack. He was from Frederick, Wisconsin, and he was returning from a co-op meeting around 10:30 in the evening when he nearly slammed into a UFO that was on the road in front of him. Its bottom was half enshrouded in fog, and inside the visible transparent dome, what he saw again is 6-foot-tall ape-like creature with reddish-brown fur covering its body except for the face. Only this thing had pointed ears, which I find that's interesting. Mm-hmm. It appeared to be operating a control panel. So the farmer, as he passed the object, suddenly the object started to rise, and then it just disappeared. What I find that's interesting in some of the cases I already read to you is that they describe these beings as 6 foot tall. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's just like the one from Chile. They mentioned that creature was approximately 6 feet tall. I wonder if there's any comparison or any difference in terms of what's being reported and in terms of size when it relates to UFO craft.
Now,
that's something to take a look.
Yeah, now I'm going to have to look into it and see if there's a correlation between the two, because I'd never thought of that particular question before.
There was another case, and this happened again in one of the cases that was written by Dr. Franklin Roll. This happened in August of 1976 after a series of UFO sightings around Rutland, British Columbia here in Canada. There were several men and their children. They saw a hairy ape-like entity, again 6 to 7 feet tall, roaming about a mountainside. They also found a clump of hair that was sent to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for identification. Laboratory analysis confirmed it was a primate hair, but significantly it could not be matched to any known species on Earth. And that's an interesting a conclusion on that.
I wonder if John Kirk would know anything about that. He's a researcher up in Canada.
Yeah, that would be interesting to find out. If I'm sure that he's probably aware of this one, and of course, all the other kinds of cases. I'm always interested of stories from people who go camping, Chris, and they share their stories. One gentleman was sharing with me that when he was a kid, they were camping near a wooded area, and at night, all of a sudden, these cones were being thrown. The pine cones.
Oh, okay.
They're being. Someone was throwing pine cones at the tent where they were staying, and it kept on throughout the night. And his uncle was trying to calm him down, saying, "Don't worry about it. Someone's out there just playing a prank." But obviously, my friend realized, no, whatever was doing that was telling them to get out, and they weren't supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear a lot of. I'd rather have a pine cone thrown at me than a rock, which is their usual thing. I see you near the railroad tracks.
Yes, I'm not too far away. So yeah, this is a little powerful mic that I'm using.
In Jefferson, Texas, where the Texas Bigfoot Research Center always has their Bigfoot conference, there's 2 sets of railroad tracks, and they run through on either side of town. And every 30 minutes, there's a train going through. And they have to blow their whistle all night, all day. And it's always like, nice town, horrible trains. I guess the people living there kind of gotten used to it, but when you're visiting the town, it's like, oh man, not another train.
Wow. Well, in your section of Laredo and that part of Texas, do you get very often reports of Bigfoot, or how about other types of creatures?
Like I said, the sighting that Joe had between here and Freer, which is really mostly just ranch land, And then there were several sightings in Lake Alice, which the South Texas Bigfoot researchers went looking. I've had some contact with them, but only see them in Jefferson. And then as far as other Bigfoot, there have not been very many right in this area. Mostly what we get are UFO reports. But we did have something that we're not too sure what it was. I refer to it as the Webb County Beast because it was a report from some illegal aliens who had been picked up by one of our agents. And they said they were being chased by something, and they described it as being a large gorilla or something like that. And it chased them into an arroyo, and they literally chased down a Border Patrol agent to surrender to him because they were terrified by this creature. And they thought it was going to try to kill them. And it happened on two separate occasions in the same general area, right off of 44. But haven't been able to go out there because it's all private property. And the ranch owners, they're not too interested in people traipsing about their property looking for this creature.
Wow, that's very similar to in the book that was written by Rocky Elmore.
Yes, Out on Foot.
Out on Foot, yes, another Border Patrol agent. He, if I remember him sharing that
yes.
There were a number of people that were rushing down the mountain. The illegal folks that were just running it down in terror, and they started to say they were being chased by a monster.
Mm-hmm. Have you had contact with Rocky, or just through Facebook?
Just through Facebook and email, and on the phone occasionally. And I try to forward him anything that I might find. He's definitely interested in UFO phenomena as well. Mm-hmm. And I loved his presentation. We were trying to get him to be a speaker back then at the Del Rio conference, which is what, an hour or two.
It's about 140 miles northwest from here.
We were both Noe and I and a couple of other folks. We were putting on these conferences there in Del Rio, and we thought that he would be an excellent person to be a speaker. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it. But his book. I always value any reports from law enforcement. From Border Patrol to county sheriff and local police department, especially when they encounter something that is quite different, out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm. Just for the listening audience, in case they don't know it, Rocky Elmore wrote a book called Out on Foot, and if you haven't read it yet, you should, because it is a page-turning adventure which is all non-fiction, which is amazing. Ghosts, Bigfoot, you name it, he's got it.
Rocky, Rocky. Chris, how am I doing on time?
You're good. If you've got a few more stories, let's go for it.
Yeah, I just real quickly, I want to acknowledge a real good friend of mine. He's a he's a Bigfoot researcher. His name is Daryl Owens, and Daryl is the director of a Bigfoot organization here in Northern California known as the Northern California Squatchers.
Okay.
And I became an honorary member, and he has an excellent website, northerncaliforniasquatchers.com. And you could also find out what's happening here in Northern California, and it connects with a number of other interesting organizations. There's one I just started to get a newsletter called the Squatchable newsletter.
Yes.
But it's fascinating. It has a lot of updated information of what's going on in terms of sightings. The thing that gets me the most is the howling that's been recorded by Bigfoot or something similar to that. Periodically, there'll be someone recording these strange roars or howling, and I just said, "Man, this is like this thing would really get to me if this was a nightmare."
Could you tell?
Listening.
Could you tell the listeners about the video? I believe it's on your Facebook. The couple near Clipper Mills, California.
I'm trying to recall that one.
They were hauling a boat up the side of a mountain, and something happened to their vehicle, and they weren't able to continue. They had to wait for the morning, and while they're waiting, something woke them up in the middle of the night. Yeah,
they were hearing all this howling, and some people were speculating that perhaps it could have been coyotes or a mountain lion, but then
no, that's not a coyote or a
there's
mountain
no way. Yeah, you listen to that. He said, "I sure would not want to run into that thing."
Just on a side note, did you happen to see the movie Willow Creek?
I think yes.
Couple they're staying out in a tent, and they start hearing the howling and the wood knocking, and the next thing you know, bad things happen. Bob Goldthwait directed the movie, the comedian.
Oh, yeah. There was another Bigfoot creature movie that came out, and this came out of it was based in Texas.
Yes, there's something in the woods.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Yes. I enjoyed it.
Based on two actual events that the director John Ford melded together to make one movie, and a good friend of mine was in the movie, Brian Empey. Not a real big part, but still, you see somebody in a movie that you know, that's always thrilling.
Oh, what part did he play?
He's sitting in a cafe, and a fight breaks out, and he turns and he looks over his shoulder at the fight, and that was his big moment in Hollywood, or non-Hollywood, since it's an independent movie. But he got a thrill out of being in a movie, and I can just
that movie also had a Bigfoot UFO connection.
It did
toward the end.
It's worth seeing for anyone out there who hasn't watched it. It's the movie called Something in the Woods, and it's an independent movie, very well made and worth seeing. And it was filmed in Jefferson, Texas.
Jefferson, Texas.
A little bitty town, a really cool place. That's unfortunately too many trains in that area.
Yeah.
How about the other? Yes.
Go ahead.
The other video that you sent me, where the rock hound, he was out picking up rocks in the.
Yeah. That one really fascinated me, because this is a gentleman who didn't ever thought about Bigfoot, and he said that he thought the Bigfoot Research Organization were Hollywood.
Yes.
He made that statement at first, but he became, I believe, a true believer once he heard that thing howling and how it scared him and scared the heck out of his dog.
Oh, yes. That has always been my test as to how real a howl is. I was listening to Coast one night, back when Art Bell was still running the show, and they were playing a bunch of Bigfoot howls that this group had caught on tape. And they would play one, and it sounded okay, and they'd play another. Then they played one, and my dog ran and hid under the bed.
Oh, no.
And every time they would play that one particular tape, she would go and disappear. But the rest, she just sat there like it was nothing. So I always consider the animals, they know more about what's going on than we do. So if your dog is scared, you need to be scared too. And
exactly.
The man in the...
I was just wondering, would you go camping, or do you go camping very often, Chris?
Yes, but I took an RV, and we take our dog. Not so much for protection, but just for her or his nose. So if anything comes around the trailer at night, he'll let us know. He's the door alarm. He barks at anything outside, and so far nothing. But I take it back. We were camping in Ohio. We were trying to camp in Ohio. We were coming from Indiana on our way to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We were going to the Mothman Museum. And we had to stop for the night on a little RV park on the side of the road, but we couldn't find the RV park. It was in my wife's tablet. It was on the GPS. It just wasn't where they were both saying it was. Anytime we came near this bridge, the dog would go completely nuts, barking and growling. Wow. He was snapping at the window. And as soon as I would pull away from that bridge, he would go and hide under my wife's legs.
Wow.
We went completely around the mountain. We wind up right back at that same bridge, and he had the exact same reaction.
Wow.
And it was that crazy, insane dog act. It wasn't just barking and snapping. And as soon as we would pull away, he went right back to being the happy puppy that he should be.
My nephew was telling me that he had a friend who took his dog and with him and his friend out on a motorcycle, and they went out to. He was staying with his father. There was a camper there. They were staying with his father, and then the young man decided to take his dog and him. They were going to go out and camp out in the woods, and the guy's dog just was going crazy, and so he realized he better get back to the camper. So he took his dog and himself back to the camper, and they went inside the camper. His father was there, and all of a sudden, the dog just kept crying throughout the entire night. And then in the morning, when they woke up and started to go outside from their camper, they noticed all these footprints all around the camper.
Yikes!
He never visited. Yeah, no wonder why the dog went crazy.
Well, a few times we stay there in Jefferson, we haven't had any occurrences, but I keep hoping. Of course, don't you know, you go to a Bigfoot conference and then you say you had a Bigfoot encounter, nobody's going to believe you.
Yeah. Oh, that was what I found really interesting was listening to the stories and people sharing their encounters and the fact, sharing UFO sightings as well. And so I definitely think, and these conferences that are now combining the different topics together, I think that's a really a great service to the public.
That is fantastic. I really like the combination much better than the folks that, we don't want anything to do with that other group because they're all crazy. And it's like, wait a minute, you're the ones running around out in the woods looking for this creature. Unfortunately, there are people out there that they think that everybody else is crazy.
Yeah. Oh, I have to send you some photos that my friend Daryl Owens
already
had. He came to one of our MUFON meetings and he brought some of the plaster Paris footprints and handprints. They were, quite chilling. I mean, I was quite amazed how big the hand of one of these things looked like.
Yeah, that is Cliff Barrickman's favorite subject, I believe, because every time I go to a conference and he's there, he talks about handprints more than anything else, because most people don't even think about the fact.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you inviting me, and hope to be back. And yes. I'll have other interesting stories to share with you and the audience.
Before I let you go, if someone has a UFO report, what would be the best place to send it?
Oh, they could always go on MUFON.com and make a report.
And do you have any public events coming up where people could see you talk?
I have one here locally, just here in the Bay Area. I'll be speaking at the Ball Theater, BAL Theater, November 3rd and 4th. They're having a UFO. Well, they call it the X Fest, UFO X Fest, and I'll be one of the speakers there. I'm hoping that I'll be able to do a lot more. Yes. Speaking on right now, as you know, I'm been taking care of my mom here, and so
you got your mom. That's more important than entertaining the folks in the audience.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we have radio shows like yours, and the opportunity to share interesting information, and I'm sure the audience out there has also some interesting tales to share as well.
Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Rubin Uriarte for being on the show tonight, and I'm going to let him get back to his life in the rest of the world.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.